Like I said, it's about 4 acres. I wanted to sort of show you guys, if you aren't familiar with it, a little bit about the context that we're in. So we're still in the city limits of Salida. And if you sort of pan with me over here, you might be able to see S Mountain behind me. And then you can also see that we share a parking lot here with the soccer fields and with the dog park. So we're really close to the spur trail. So I just want to point out that like this is really like this farm, the purpose of it is to be part of the community, and it really, the placement of it is also really within the community. Most of our goals here at the Community and School Farm are to try and grow as much produce as possible for the Salida School District and to extend the season to match with the school year as much as possible. And so to do that, I have a meeting every year with Terry Clark, who's the Director of Nutrition Services at the school, to figure out what kind of produce he wants us to grow, what we can grow well here, and what they can use easily in the school district lunches and meals. And then we also have the summer, and we grow a lot of produce in the summer, and schools aren't usually in session in the summer, and so we have a lot of other outlets where we take that food at that point. So we sell to the hospital food service, we sell to Moonstone, another CSA here in town. We sell through a youth farmers market at the Boys and Girls Club. So we try and continue to get that food out to the community when schools aren't in session. So while we have a moment right now, it's been kind of a very windy, blustery day here. We've gotten a little bit of snow, nothing that has stuck, but a lot of big gusts of wind. So while we have a moment that's not too windy, I wanna show you a little bit outside, and then we'll show you some of our season extension structures that we use to try and get our growing season to match up as best as possible with the school year. So let's walk this way. Okay, so this area behind me is what I consider our front garden. And so we have some raised beds here. In general, this is a very wet site. And so we found that it's really helpful to build up off from the ground a little bit so that things drain out. And so you'll see behind me, there's a couple of framed raised beds. One of the things we're excited about with the framed raised beds is hopefully this year putting up some low tunnels over them. So that's a pretty low cost way of extending the season a little bit. They look like hoops. And because they have framed raised beds, we're gonna put something called C-channel on it, which allows us to really lock plastic over the top of them and seal it even when we have really gusty days like today. If we look a little bit further over here, we have a number of different, I call them the rock beds because they are built up and then edged with rocks. You can also see that we have a number of fruit trees over here. So we have some apples, some pears, some apricots, and some plums. And they, like the beds, are also raised up so that those tree roots aren't getting too wet in the really wet times of the year. We also have a number of herbs. A lot of the beds up front, we try and have a little bit more themes too. So this is chives and oregano, and you can tell it needs to be weeded, but we'll get there. And the next bed over was a flower bed last year. So we do still try and practice crop rotation in these front beds, but we have a little bit more perennials. And so what's in the herb bed this year will rotate through the annual herbs, but the perennial herbs will, of course, stay there for the next year. And the bed just past that is also a bed that has some perennials in it. It's a salve bed. And so we grow lavender, plantain, which is often considered a weed, but a very useful weed, and calendula to make salves with some of the camps during the summer. I think, well, it's still not too crazy. Maybe we'll go a little bit further. And behind that salve bed, you can see some black beds. Those beds are tarped. So that's an area that's one of the wettest areas on the farm because it's just open beds instead of being raised beds. And so last year we tried to grow melons there, and it was too wet for the melons. So this year I'm putting some onions there because onions can tolerate a little bit more moisture, and because we don't have our full irrigation turned on to the production field yet. And so these smaller areas in the rock beds up front, I can reach with a hose, or I can set up a hose to a sprinkler to like get things started earlier since we're in kind of a dry spell. Despite the few snowflakes this morning, we haven't had a lot of snow. We're gonna take a slow turn around, and we're gonna go look into the wash station for a second. So we've done a lot. Guidestone, part of our mission is really to work through partnerships, and so I'm gonna mention some of the partnerships that have happened and been really critical to us building up the farm and the infrastructure that we have here. So this shade structure was built with the building skills students at the high school several years ago, and it's really crucial for us to be able to shade out some of the areas where we're washing vegetables so that when they come in the middle of the summer, they have a shady spot while we're waiting to wash them. And you can see we have a stainless steel sink. Things go through the sink, they get weighed, and then we have a refrigerator in the shed, which we won't see today, but it's a refrigerator. And so that's how we make sure that things are cool, so that we cool them down and that they have a longer shelf life when we deliver to the schools, when we deliver to the hospital, when we deliver to anybody that we're delivering to. One of the things that we're excited about here, and this is why there's a pallet right here in front of this, is that we're gonna set that pallet up to be vertical. Maybe I can have a Vanna White sort of set it up. This is one of our AmeriCorps members who's helping out and practicing some social distancing while moving things around. Will you set that up? So the idea of a pallet garden is just trying to make use of our existing resources, and we'll be hanging little pockets of landscape fabric in there and filling it with soil, so we'll have a lot of herbs in there. Part of the reason we want to do a pallet garden there is to offer a little bit more shade in the morning when we're harvesting to that area right behind there, so that we can make sure that we keep our cool greens, which is what we harvest first thing in the morning, cool before we get to wash them. This area out here is, I think of it as where we harden off a lot of our vegetables. So we put out pallets, and then when they're ready to come out of the greenhouse, we'll keep them out here for about a week before we actually transplant them out, so that they have a time to adjust to the temperatures. And then, as I just did today, we had pulled a lot more out of here, but they were in styrofoam trays. I was literally afraid the whole trays were gonna blow away, so I put them back in the high tunnel. So we'll go back to the high tunnel for a second. So this high tunnel, sometimes I call it a hoop house. It looks a lot like a greenhouse. In my mind, when I say a greenhouse, I usually mean that it's heated, and this hoop house is not heated at all. It's just one single layer over the hoops. And one of the things that, we have two things that I'm hopeful to do soon to this to improve it. The first is to add a second layer and an inflation fan, which that'll give 2 layers of plastic. And especially with that air in between, it really helps to increase the amount of insulation. So it'll keep it warmer in the summer. And also, as we go in there, you'll hear how much the wind is flapping on that plastic. With the inflation fan, that gives a cushion, and so that plastic will last longer because it won't be subject to quite the same amount of wind whipping on it. The sides of the hoop house do roll up. I'm not going to roll them up now because of the wind, but that allows us to get better ventilation and like breezes through that will cool it down. We also have a door on either end. We have larger doors that we could open, but we generally don't on the ends. If you have a hoop house that is at least twice as long as it is wide, like ours is 24 by 48, you really need to have some kind of additional ventilation other than end doors, because the way that the thermodynamics work is otherwise you'll end up with a dead zone in the middle that won't get fully ventilated and things will get too hot in there. So that's part of why we have roll-up sides on both sides. Yeah, so let's go into the hoop house. So we're in a big change to the temperature. So in here, it's about 88 degrees. Outside, it's much cooler. Behind me, you can see we have a lot of winter crops that we have planted. We've just been sort of finishing up, taking out some winter crops and starting to put in some spring crops. So with our AmeriCorps, Taryn and Elle, we transplanted in all of these lettuce that were started in the dome. We'll show you how we started the lettuce in a second. And then over on this side, we also have some scallions, some carrots and cilantro and parsley and some spinach. And those have all been in here since last fall. So we're about to start turning the rest of these over. The products that the school really wants most are spinach, lettuce, onions, scallions, things that they can use a lot in salads. They really love carrots. So we're trying to do a lot of those things here in the winter and keep extending that season so we can offer that longer through the year. We have been able to harvest to the schools even through the coronavirus outbreak. Our schools here are distributing bagged lunches and breakfasts Mondays and Thursdays. And so this week and last week we gave them some spinach and some lettuce. So it's really exciting to us that we can do some of that even in the middle of this. Can one of you open that door? Thanks. We run the irrigation in the high tunnel is all drip irrigation, and so I managed to set it up. Since our general irrigation isn't on yet, we hook it up through hoses. And then the last thing I want to show you guys while we're in here is to go get a peek at the germination chamber. So like I said, this high tunnel is not at all heated. So the only thing that I have to heat with is 2 heat mats that are on the bottom of each of the germination chambers. So the germination chambers, it just keeps things warmer and moister while they're germinating. And I tend to keep things in our germination chambers longer than I would in other places because they are, because we don't have any other heated space in here. So let's look at the far one first. So last year I built the first germination chamber, and I found this set of shelves, and I believe the term I would use for the first one is a little bit janky. It was a little cobbled together as I started creating it, but I had some extra plastic, so I wrapped it in plastic, and then I had these extra panels that I use as doors. And in order to get 4 shelves worth in here, I've used some hoops up here so that I can pull the plastic over the hoops, or at the moment while it's during the day, I'm going to open it up and vent it. And the plastic hooks on with these clips, just giant binder clips. And so I have 4 sets of trays in here. Now, if I had a real germination chamber that I was really just using to germinate things and just leaving them in for 36 hours, I would have these racks way closer, almost like a speed rack at a bakery, because as soon as something germinated and was looking for light, I would take it out somewhere else. Because this is the only place that I have that's heated in the high tunnel, I spaced out these shelves a little bit more so that things still can get some light. Sometimes they do get a little bit on the leggy side, but it seems to be working out pretty well. So in here on the very bottom, we have a bunch of things that we just started yesterday for our plant sale. We're having a plant sale Saturday, May 16th, and another one on Saturday, June 6th in the afternoon. And then the rest of it is things that mostly have gotten potted up. There are tomatoes and peppers, things that like it really hot, and some basil that also really likes it really hot. So those things I keep in here for a longer time. Other things that I start, like kale and chard and lettuce, I might keep in here for a shorter amount of time and then transition them either to the dome or out here in the pathways. We're gonna slowly turn around. I'm gonna show you one of the things I'm really excited about is I love fruit trees, and so I've been trying to have us grow a little bit more fruit trees and more diversity. So down here we have, I'm rooting some elderberries, and elderberries and a lot of things will root better if you add in rooting hormone, or you can add in a willow twig puts off a lot of rooting hormone itself. And so you can see that these elderberries are starting to leaf out up here, and they'll be starting to make roots in the water, and then I'll be able to transplant them into tree pots. And these two are 2 hazelnuts that I'm going to be planting out this year. And then this tray is a bunch of apricots that we started from seed last fall. So we saved the seeds, we cracked open the apricot pits and got the seeds out of the center of them, and then put them in a fridge in wet sand over the winter, and then pulled them out about 6 weeks ago. And then I divided out the ones that looked like they were already sprouting and put them into this wet sand here. So we're gonna go, I wanna stop and see if there are any questions about the high tunnel or the germination chamber. Okay. Okay, we've disconnected the mic. We're ready to hear questions.
Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay,
Great. Yeah, so there was one question, Monica, about time and location of the plant sale that we're going to have that we just mentioned. And I was sort of in the middle of typing that up, but just to say, I think we've been thinking in the afternoon, so sort of in the 1 to 4 time frame, but some of the decisions are still being determined based on what the social distancing restrictions are going to be at that time as to how the pickup will work and where it'll be. But do you have more information around that you'd like to share?
I think that we feel like the pickup will be here at the farm, and exactly how that pickup will work we still need to figure out some of the details. But in general, if it's a save the date, let's say 1 to 4 in that time frame on Saturday, May 16th and Saturday, June 6th. And we will have a bunch of cool crops like lettuce, kale, broccoli, chard, and cabbage in the first one. And in the second one in June, we'll have those 5 along with some peppers, tomatoes, and cherry tomatoes, and basil.
Awesome, thanks. Also, there's another question. How long do you leave the plants in the germination trays?
That's a great question. So things that I start, how long I leave them in the germination chambers is longer if they are like a warm crop, like a tomato or a pepper. I will probably have them in the germination chambers for 6 to 8 weeks. At that point, I will move them into the dome this year, because while the dome doesn't stay as warm as I would like at night, it doesn't freeze. And so when it gets to a point where it's not really dropping below 40, tomatoes and peppers will be fine with that. They would grow faster if it stayed above 50 or 60. And that's why I'm trying to give them as much start as I can in the germination chambers. But we have a lot of tomatoes and a lot of peppers. And as they pot up, they get bigger and bigger, and they kind of take more space. And so I'll take them over to the dome. For the things that I'm just germinating in here, I might leave them in here only 1 or 2 weeks, and then shift them out to a cooler space. And sort of they get stepped down, they get stepped down into just being in the high tunnel, which is not heated, but still stays warmer than outdoors. And then they'll go out on those pallets for about a week before they're transplanted in. And the pallets aren't any warmer than outside because they are outside, but they're a little bit sheltered from the wind. Like when we get to see our production field is really exposed to the wind. And so that's sort of what I'm getting them used to by leaving them out there. And they also, it's less humid out there, so they're getting used to the dryness as well.
Awesome. There's another question. What do you do to nurture the soil in the hoop house?
That's a great question, and it's something that I'm really working on. Like I feel like this hoop house, we've used it for a long time. So 2 things that I'm trying to do. We use a Happy Frog soil conditioner, and we also use a compost that we buy locally from Elements, compost. Julie Mock here in town. So we add that in right as we like turn things over. So when you add in compost, even things that like are finished compost, I still try to wait 4 months before I'm going to harvest out of it. And so there's like a couple times a year where like I have that window, and that's when I really try and add it. The other thing I'm really trying to do this year in this hoop house also has some drainage challenges when it gets really wet. And so I'm trying to build up all the beds higher. They are raised over the ground, but I think if I raise them up higher, then we'll have better yields because things will be a little bit less waterlogged in those really wet times in the summer.
And another question that's come through in the chat box, and thanks everybody for all of these great questions. How cold does it get in the high tunnel, for example, this time of year?
Great question. Last night it got down to 33. We had a really cold night several nights ago. I think it got down to 14 at the farm, and it got down to 25 in the high tunnel. Usually the high tunnel seems to be giving us like 8 degrees, 10 degrees of warmer than outside. The dome seems to give us maybe another 8 degrees or 10 degrees. I haven't seen the dome freeze. And when we go in there, you'll see that like we haven't put in the beds yet, and that's going to be additional buffer because that'll be a lot more soil that will absorb warmth during the day and release it at night. So I haven't seen it freeze since a really cold night in January, and then it got down to 31 and a half. So I think it'll stay above freezing when it's all built out.
Nice. There aren't any other specific questions like that right now. So
great.
Does anybody?
Okay, then we'll go ahead and walk into the movable high tunnel next. And Taryn, if you want to close that, that'd be, or L. I guess L's still coming out. Okay, so I don't like highlighting this part, but this is our resource file. And years ago, I had somebody tell me, they're like, it's not a junk pile, it's a resource pile. So a lot of times we save things on the farm that, you know, certainly things that I'm going to use, like T-posts I'm going to use again this year, things like that. But there's sometimes where I save things where I'm like, I think that might be useful down the road. And so I'm going to put it in the resource pile. And one of the things I'm excited about this year is trying to build a pallet organizer, where we use a lot of pallets sort of as little filing systems. So we have a little bay for certain, like all of our hoops, and we have another bay for all of our tarps. We have another bay for all of our row cover. And I think that'll also help because as we can see that it has been quite windy here. And so there's some things where I have to move them somewhere else just so that they don't blow away. So that's our plan for this area for this year. All right, and I'm gonna have us look at this movable high tunnel first from the outside. So this is a movable high tunnel. It was put up in 2018, and we first started growing in it last year. It's movable, it's on tracks. So literally you can move it with about 4 to 6 people. More is definitely easier, but you can do it with 4. You can see along the bottom, there's a bunch of bags that are holding down what's called the skirt, which helps to seal the plastic down to the ground. There are also stakes in all 4 corners. And then we take the 2 doors off, and we'll go see the doors in a second. And then 4 people can push this whole structure down to cover the other side. The benefit of the movable high tunnel is that we can grow something in here in the spring. And then when it's time to start our tomatoes or some warm crop, we can move it over the tomatoes, and the things that are in here now, like spinach and carrots, don't need the covering anymore. And so it gives us a little bit more flexibility on trying to do a lot of different things in different seasons. It's pretty hard for us to grow tomatoes outside. We get just such a short season. We have about 100 frost-free days, and a lot of tomato varieties, a lot of the cherry tomatoes might finish in 60 days. We'd start getting harvest, but a lot of the like heirloom varieties like Cherokee Purple is an 80-day tomato. So if we have 100 days and I time it just right, we get 20 days of harvest, which, 3 weeks of harvest with all the work you put into tomatoes, it's hard to sometimes see if that's worth it. So we try and specialize in really short day tomatoes, and then we try and grow as many as we can in some kind of season extension so that, even if we get 6 weeks of production out of them, that's a lot more than 3. The movable high tunnel is not as sealed as the hoop house, and so it doesn't offer quite as much, many degrees of frost protection, but it still, I would say, adds probably about 6 degrees.
Uh-oh. So, okay, we will, looks like maybe we just lost them for a minute. So I think we'll give them a second to come back. I did want to say, because I've had a couple of questions about, what would be some things that, if we could speak a little bit to how other communities could get a program like this started. And I think probably I would love to have that conversation with people. If you're wondering, like, how can I get this started with my school district or a different institution, because we also do work with the hospital here. And so I would be happy, Monica or I would be happy to have that conversation with you all. But might be better and easier to do that in more of a context of a personalized based on your personal situation and your community. So just to say that I would be happy to chat more about those opportunities, kind of one-on-one over, on a phone call or something after the fact. So just to let you know. Oh, and then there was also just a question now about funding information, and just so this project has been there's a lot of grant support that's come through for this project in particular, and then there's some support as well through program fees and for program fees and what I want to say, and donations. The Colorado Health Foundation and Live Well, Chaffee County was a Live Well community back when this first started, and so Live Well and the Colorado Health Foundation were really significant partners financially in helping get this program started initially back in 2011 and 2012. And since then, there's different private foundations, and as well as we currently have a specialty crop block grant. This is our second round of one of those grants as well. So that's another opportunity. We also do some wholesale accounts, but not, we aren't doing any retail. And our relationship with the school district is such that because, and maybe Monica already mentioned this, but because the school district owns the land that this farm is on, that the produce that we give to the school for their lunch program is a direct trade to, it's a direct trade. So there's no financial exchange between the school district and Guidestone for the produce or the lease of the site. It's more of a barter. Okay, and I think, are they back? I'm not sure.
Hi, we're back.
Oh, they're back. Okay, they're back. Yay, here they are.
Okay, sorry, I'm just setting up a hotspot if that will keep us on more.
Did you lose both audio and video?
We did. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, you should be set up.
Okay.
Thanks, ladies.
And here's the password.
Okay, hang on 1 sec. I'm wondering if it might go automatically.
And I know, just to recognize to everybody that doing a virtual farm tour is a bit of a, there's a bit of an irony in that. So thank you all for your patience and for your willingness to kind of dive in and join us for this. And certainly, unprecedented times are unprecedented measures, I guess, for unprecedented times. But thank you for joining us. And
I'm not seeing it pop up in the list.
while we kind of work on getting you guys back.
Great. You see it?
Yep. I think I am connected.
Great.
We can hear both of you.
Okay.
I don't see you on here yet.
Oh no.
Does
Okay,
anybody
so
else
then
have
we
questions that they want to send through the chat box right now while they're kind of working on getting the technical side of things? Thank you. Oh, why is the ground so wet?
Oh, okay.
Um,
Can you guys hear me? I can answer that.
yeah.
Okay, so part of that is just like where this land lies, like we're kind of in a valley. Part of it is that we run along a ditch, and the area just to the west of us is a ditch overflow site, and so it literally seeps under the ground. There's like a big berm so that we aren't getting overland water, but it seeps under the ground, and sometimes will seep up in different places. The good thing has been that like we have done so much work to build up beds and build those raised beds. So most of the times it's like our feet are wet, but the crops aren't. But that has been sometimes a challenge when we have really wet years like last year. The rest of the time it's mostly been fine. So we have 4 beds here. This is a 16 by 24 foot movable high tunnel. And it has 2 positions. So it has this winter position as we have it now and the summer position. Basically the way we decided which would be winter and which would be summer is that in winter when the sun is lower, this doesn't really block the sun that the hoop house is getting, even though it's a little bit to the south of it. And so in the summer, when it would be blocking that, the sun is higher and it's not really a problem anyway. So it's sprinkling lightly, but let's try and go look at the production field briefly. All right, so our production field here, you can also maybe see that it's like also raised a little bit. There was a lot of soil and material brought in to keep the production field up above the high water table here. We use drip irrigation on this as well. There is an area where I'm trying, we call it the expansion area, where I'm trying to like slowly keep improving the soil that direction a little bit by another 50 feet or so. And so with our AmeriCorps members, Taryn and Elle, we sowed a bunch of cover crops there a week ago, trying to catch any of these rains. So it was a mix of oats, peas, and vetch. When we do cover crops, we often try and do a mix of a grass like oats or rye or winter wheat and a legume like peas or vetch. So we'll try and grow that and then mow it down and let that go back and feed the soil. The other cover crop that we do quite a bit here is buckwheat. Buckwheat it needs it to be really warm. It can't freeze or it'll die in a freeze, but it's very fast. So it will go through its whole life cycle in about 8 weeks. So the place where we did a lot of buckwheat this past year was in the pathways for our pumpkin patch. So the way that we have been using this field the last 2 years, we've been working with Brandon Hawkins, who's the facilities director at the school district. And he has a tractor that can make the raised beds for us, which saves us a lot of time doing it on our own. But it's a set width. And so it's just about 2 feet, which is perfect for a lot of our crops. The smaller crops like beets and spinach and lettuce and even kale and chard we can do in those wide of beds. But things like pumpkins, they sprawl out so much that we couldn't put them just 2 feet apart from each other. So we put them every other bed, and in the beds in between, we cover crop those with buckwheat as a way to try and get a little bit more nutrition back into the crops and also to help hold the soil. Because we're in a pretty exposed area, the wind can cause a lot of soil erosion, and so I'm trying to do what I can to get more mulch on the land, to cover crop the land and have the roots and have like something growing on the field at all times. Because of that, I left a lot of what you would call the stubble of the crops over the winter. So our kale stalks and our cabbage stalks last year, after we stopped harvesting from them, we left them so that their roots are holding the land and they're creating a tiny bit of a windbreak on the side. down along the fence through a partnership with the NRCS, we also planted a number of perennial windbreak plants several years ago. So Siberian pea shrub and golden currant and gooseberry. And so that they're still quite small, but they're growing slowly. And when they get bigger, they'll provide a little bit more of a windbreak. So since they hadn't grown up that much this year, last year I planted a windbreak of sunflowers and sorghum. And this year I'm planting a windbreak of sunflowers and a couple kinds of popcorn, because I think they'll be really fun to harvest with the kids, and it's really easy to save the seeds. And so one of the kinds is called strawberry popcorn, and it's this little red popcorn that when you grow it, it really looks like an oversized strawberry. And who doesn't love popcorn? So that's sort of, when I'm trying to think about like the crop plan, I'm thinking a little bit about like, how can I use one crop for multiple purposes? So of course, we love the taste of popcorn, but we also like to teach kids about saving seeds and using it as an educational experience and also a windbreak. And if I can have it serve many functions, then that's really ideal. Okay, we'll walk down this way a little bit, and if it seems like it's getting very bumpy, just give a big wave, and maybe we'll turn our video off for a second while we walk.
Monica, can you hear me? No. Thanks those of you that have been asking questions, and the next time she breaks for a Q&A session, we'll make sure that
when we get down here a little bit, we'll be able to look down. You'll be able to see how Brandon made the beds. So you can sort of look down here and see they're about 2 feet apart. One of the reasons I really like having some kind of formed raised beds is it with kids, students, and volunteers, it makes it a little bit easier to see where to step and where not to step, especially if you've just seeded something and there's no visible crop out there yet. You can also see that we have a line of bags and drip tape in the middle of the field. That was so that I could mark where our garlic was so it wouldn't get formed into a bed accidentally. So garlic is something that we plant in the fall. We planted it this year with a group from the Boys and Girls Club, and then we'll harvest it in July, probably. Great, let's come on down here. All right, so I want us to shoot back this way just to show you again from the other side the way that the movable high tunnel works. You can see there are these 2 tracks, metal tracks. Those tracks, because of how windy our site is, are actually set into concrete piers as well. Usually they're just staked down, but we really did not want to have the movable high tunnel blow away. So with the movable high tunnel, that was a partnership. It was funded by the USDA Specialty Crop Block Grant. We also worked with students from the building trades class at the high school and students at Horizon Exploratory Academy have helped to build the structure, helped to cover the structure, and have also helped to move the structure from the winter position to the summer position and back. Again, this is another place. I know somebody asked a little bit about the hoop house and what kind of fertility treatments we do there. This is a place where it's a little bit easier. So as soon as we move it and we're done harvesting in an area, then it's easy for us to apply a lot of finished compost and know that we're not going to harvest from it for another 120 days. I use that number as it's the organic produce rule for it, but it also seems like a best practice. So while we're not certified organic here, we really use all of the organic practices. I want us to pause and see if people have questions about the production field or the movable high tunnel.
Monica, can you hear us?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. There are a couple of questions. Somebody wants to know what you use for mulch. So out in the production field.
Great. So we used some wood chips. We got some wood chips pretty late in the year last year, but I'm really excited about them because we have used some straw, but straw blows away really fast out here in the production field. So it's a better mulch for us in one of the tunnels. But wood chips won't blow away nearly as badly. So that's part of it. Sometimes we'll lay down some landscape fabric also in the really wide pathways, like between the pumpkins. There are pros and cons to landscape fabric, but sometimes if you're trying to manage a lot of land with relatively few people or relatively little equipment, it can really be a lifesaver in terms of like trying to manage weeds and not let them get out of control.
Thanks. Another question around cover crops, or about cover crops, is do the cover crops between the squash ever choke out the squash, or are they happy neighbors?
They have been happy neighbors. The cover crop that I use between winter squash and pumpkins is buckwheat. Buckwheat will reseed like crazy, but it's also literally the easiest plant to kill. Like you can stomp on it. In fact, a couple years ago before I was here, they had a buckwheat stomping party to take down the cover crop. So that's a really fun way to get rid of it. And it just is sort of, for me, I feel like, yes, maybe it becomes a weed, but if I have to choose a weed, buckwheat's gonna be it every time. So.
Nice.
Plus, actually this year we had Taryn and Elle collect some of the seeds from the buckwheat, which are called buckwheat groats. You can either grind those up, or what we're gonna do is we're gonna save them and use them to reseed cover crop this year.
Great. There's a question as to whether the sunflowers stand up well in the wind out there.
They have. This year I planted them in the summer, and our strongest winds are usually in the spring and the fall. And so I don't know if the sunflowers would make it through some of the spring winds, but the timing of when they grow helps. So because of that, they're not the most effective windbreak, because they're a windbreak when the wind isn't quite as strong, but it still helps us a little bit with some of the really delicate crops we have out here.
So there's two more, well, there's three more questions, if we have time for those right now. One is, what else do we use for windbreaks, and do we ever use clover as a cover crop? Or those, I guess that's two.
Great. I would love to use clover as a cover crop. One of the like long-term goals I have for the production field is to shift to more of it to no-till production. And then I would use, I think it's called Dutch white clover. It stands up really well to foot traffic. And I would probably space things out more and have wider pathways, and then have that clover in the pathway because it holds up to foot traffic pretty well. Clover is really nice because it's a legume, so it fixes nitrogen, just like peas and vetch do. But it's a perennial, so you don't have to plant it every year. I haven't used clover out here yet, but it's in my goals.
And
remind me what the other question was.
Oh, like, do we do anything else for windbreaks? And do we put windbreaks, do we just have one major windbreak, or do we actually have several across the field?
Great question. So actually, let's pan over this way. So we're really lucky because in the place where there would be a windbreak, especially for the high tunnel and the movable high tunnel, we have these really lovely tall trees. So they make a pretty effective windbreak. So the windbreak that I'm usually working on is on the far side of that, on the south end of the west side of the farm. I mean, I would love to have windbreaks all over the place. Don't get me wrong. And one thing I have thought about is we just are in the middle of grafting a bunch of other trees. And in some places where I've farmed before, we've run a line of perennial trees down the middle of our field. And so if I put trees, like apple trees every 15 feet, I could run them down the middle of this field. Eventually, years down the road, I would lose a little bit of growing space on either side, but they would also create a better windbreak. And so that's another thing that I'm thinking about doing. When I think about where to place those, one of the big things is trying to think about where my irrigation is and making sure that's all set up for those trees as well. So currently we just have one windbreak that's right along the fence. And then an annual windbreak that's the westernmost row of the production field, but I would like to plan more.
Nice. Okay, we have one more set of questions from Kayla's daughter, Aretta. She wants to know how many plants How many different plants do we grow? And she also wants to know how many total plants in all.
Oh, Loretta, that is a hard question. So I would say we grow about 50 different kinds of plants. So there's 10 or 11 things that we really focus on for the school district. So that's cherry tomatoes, cucumbers, zucchini, lettuce, spinach, onions, carrots, peas, beans, and then there's like a couple others like scallions. I got the school district really excited about salad turnips last year, so there's a couple others that we're like adding in. But then we grow a lot of other things that maybe they're for another outlet, maybe they're things that I'm trialing for the schools to see if they would like them. So the salad turnips was new to the schools last year. I also grew some tomatillos for the school last year, which they did like. They may not be like one of the things that the school is like, oh, this is definitely on our top 10 list, but they'll be interested in taking them from time to time, or some of them. We also grow a lot of kale. We're growing some salad mix this year. We grow some beets. We grow some chard. And then when we get to the dome, we'll talk about some of the other kinds of things that we grow in the dome. But when I think about how many plants we grow, maybe it'd be easier for me to just say if I think how many tomatoes. So we grow tomatoes almost entirely in the high tunnel and in the movable high tunnel, and then we'll put some in the dome this year. And I am gonna guess that we are growing 300 tomato plants. And that's probably more than we can fit, but sometimes I like to grow a few extra, and maybe they'll go to the plant sale, or maybe they'll go to the school gardens, or maybe if I like kill a bunch of tomatoes, then I still have some tomatoes. So it's always good to grow a few extras of things like that that take a long time. When it goes to things like carrots, we measure a lot more of what we grow in pounds, and so I don't always count how many plants I have. So the numbers I could give you from last year is that last year we grew about 500 pumpkins that went to the pumpkin patch over at the Hutchinson Ranch that we run with the Hutchinson Homestead. This year, my goal is to grow 1,200 pumpkins. We'll see if we get that many, but so a big part of our production field is also pumpkins. Some other numbers I could tell you is that last year, I think altogether, including the weight of the pumpkins, we grew about 4,500 pounds of food on this site. And so a good chunk of that went to the schools, a chunk of that was pumpkins that went to the pumpkin patch, a chunk of that went to the hospital food service, and we sold to Amika's and to Moonstone, and so it went a lot of different places.
Thanks. I think that's it for our questions for now. So if we want to move on, and then we can have more later.
Great. Okay. All right. So behind me, you can see this lovely area that got tarped. So this is an area, like I said, that tends to be pretty wet that we're going to grow our onions and scallions in this year. The tarping is what's called occultation. And so you wet down an area so it's really nice and moist, and then you cover it with tarps, and it makes this really great area for weed seeds to germinate and grow because it's warm and it's kind of wet, and then they get up and then they don't have any light because it's black tarps, and then they die. And so then when you take the tarps off, when you're ready to plant, that's like one whole generation of weeds that you don't have to deal with, as long as you don't really disturb the soil. We'll see how it works over there. It hasn't, because it's been so windy and we've had to keep putting them back on, it hasn't been staying as moist as I'd like. So, but we'll see what we can do, and then we'll go from there. And then I'm sure either way we'll have some weeding to do. That area and onions in particular, I like to mulch. And so we'll add a bunch of mulch onto that. You can walk down here. We'll get to see our compost pile. Like I said, we got compost delivered from Elements Mountain Compost, Julie Mock in town, who does a really nice compost. And then we also have
Uh-oh. Let's see if they come back here.
Let's go walk up that way to the dome. All right.
Yay.
Okay, so we're gonna go back through the front garden for a little bit. This, like I said, is our salve garden. It has calendula, which we'll have to reseed since it's an annual, and lavender. And part of the reason it's mulched is that lavender is slightly frost tender, so it can get frosted, but it's a little bit more of a tender perennial. So we really want to mulch it well to help it get through a really cold winter. And then this garden we had flowers in, so we're gonna have something else in there this year. Can't remember what off the top of my head. You can see we have, this is an apple tree in front and then 2 pear trees behind it. And so we have, I think 6 trees in this area. We also have another 4 along the fence over here. And those trees, we have started getting a small amount of fruit last year. I think last year we got 5 apricots, 3 pears, and 2 apples. So they're just starting to produce, which is really exciting. All right. So in these 2 raised beds, we've already planted them this year. We seeded carrots, beets, and they have some overwintered scallions that the first graders helped to plant last year, and a little bit of overwintered bok choy as well. They are hooped and covered, which this is sort of what I would call a low tunnel. This is with row cover. To keep it even warmer, we could add plastic, but then we would have to take it off to water as long as we don't have the main irrigation on. So far I've been watering this just through the row cover. If you have a good hose sprayer, it can get down through it. The thing that's nice about this is it keeps it a little bit warmer. It keeps it a little bit moister, which is especially important for things like carrots when they're first germinating. They really don't like to dry out. And it helps when they get a little bit bigger to protect them from some of the wind damage. So we'll walk down here. This area right here, you might notice that there's a lot of bare dirt here. We just had the electric line and the water line put into the dome, and so it all got dug up. This is sort of this little swale, and it gets pretty wet. And so my plan for this area is I've seeded a lot of wildflowers all over it. And so when I'm watering over here, if I'm watering with the sprinkler, then that's watering into these wildflowers as well. And then right down in the ditch, I'm going to plant some asparagus and mulch it because asparagus likes it really quite wet. So we'll see about that, and potentially also some rhubarb. Rhubarb might go in a little bit of a shadier spot on the north side of the dome. You can see a couple of big sort of brownish mounds along the fence. Those are comfrey plants that are just going to start coming back now. Comfrey is great. It's a dynamic accumulator. It has a really deep root that can go and get some of the minerals that are a little bit deeper in the subsoil and bring them up, and then it makes them available in their leaves to other plants. And so a lot of times we'll cut these back like 3 or 4 times a year, and we'll mulch with those comfrey leaves, or we'll add them onto the compost and use that as a way to like get some of those other minerals to be available for our plants. Speaking of compost, maybe we'll walk over there next. So one of the big things about compost in this kind of environment is that it's really hard to keep it wet enough. And so I ended up building some of our compost beds for our sort of relatively home scale compost in the rock beds where we already had irrigation. So when the irrigation's on, they get watered every day, just like everything else. And then I've built them with straw bales around them to protect them from the wind and keep them moister. And then I've covered them with burlap to try and hold that moisture in. This is our bridge to Terabithia. It goes over the ditch. So just to try and bring that in. So Taryn and Al and I just turned our compost over. It was in one spot for the summer. It was an area where I had wanted to make a little okra circle, because when I last farmed in Missouri, where okra gets to be 6 feet tall, and I thought it'd be such a cool spot for kids to walk into this little okra room. And then, of course, it's Colorado, so okra gets to be about this big, and it did not have the desired effect. So I built a compost in the middle of it. Goes from that okra circle over here. This is a new bed we're building out. It's called the swale bed because it's quite low, and so I'm going to put some things in here that like it really wet. But I think in the meantime, I'm just trying to like keep the grass down with some burlap, and then we'll extend this compost all the way down. We'll flip the compost 2 or 3 times before we apply it onto things. And let's walk over the bridge to Terabithia. So we just put in this new culvert here, and we actually just put in the driveway as part of preparing for building the dome. We knew we were going to need a lot of trucks to come in and like build up the area, the base of where the dome is, to get it up out of the water table as well. So we put down about 2 feet of soil there, and those trucks came in on this newly built driveway. And then when we put the irrigation and water in, there was a big ditch, and it seemed like the perfect moment to put that culvert in so that any drainage that comes down here doesn't just wash out the driveway. And that's also why we have the bridge to Terabithia, is to get over the ditch. And this isn't an irrigation ditch, it's just a little swale that collects water. We put up the dome last year in August, and the dome came from a company called Growing Spaces, which is based in Pagosa Springs. It's a 42-foot diameter dome, and we had 2 folks who came as crew leaders from Growing Spaces who knew what they were doing, which is really important. And then we recruited a bunch of different volunteers from the community to come and help, and spent 6 days putting this up. We put in, it's on a pier foundation, so it's actually supported by 20 different concrete piers in almost a circle, but not quite. And they are not quite exactly evenly spaced apart because there's 3 different sizes on these different triangles. Part of the reason we did a dome greenhouse is that it is much stronger and able to hold up a lot more wind, and a lot more snow load, and it also keeps things a lot warmer. And we'll go through some of the systems in the dome, but maybe what we'll do is first we'll go in there so we're out of the wind, and then we can answer any questions about the occultation, about the compost, or about the front rock gardens. Dome, sweet dome. Okay, so maybe we'll take the mic off and see if there's questions first.
All right, thanks. Let's see, there was one question about water-loving crops that might embrace those wetter areas, and do you have more thoughts about what you might plant, and especially that one spot that you just were talking about, or did you already mention those plants that you want to put in there, kind of near the compost?
A couple things that I've been really excited about is more asparagus, just because I think it would, like the schools would be really excited to get asparagus. It also comes at a time of year where it's hard for us to have a lot of variety. It's like we can do lettuce and spinach and kale and radishes. Like that's kind of it. And so having something else that the schools would be excited about would be great. I thought, and actually we can look at this area later, there's this area just north, on the north side of the dome that's also pretty low. And I was thinking about potentially looking at rhubarb there. The schools aren't as excited about rhubarb because it takes so much sugar to make it palatable, especially to children. But I'm excited about rhubarb, and I feel like, you know, that's potentially a good fit in a spot that might not be so suitable to other things. And then part of the reason that I'm trying to root those elderberries is that elderberries can take it a little bit wetter as well. So just to have a little mix of some more fruit in particular and things that can tolerate wet feet.
Awesome. And then there was one other question about, did we ever, for windbreaks, do we ever build walls or just use trees? And I did respond and mention that we used to have some shade cloth, some of that, that green sort of shade cloth hanging on the fence, but the wind just kind of kept blowing it off of there mostly. It didn't really quite do the trick, but I'm just wondering if you have other experience from other places of using walls or other things as windbreaks.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest concerns about having that windbreak or shade cloth on the fence was like worrying that it was going to take the whole fence down. And I don't know if anybody noticed it, but when we were in that back area by the production field, there were 3 deer just on the other side of the fence. And so we have a good deer fence around here, but I know that like if I leave a gate open, there will be deer here. And they're always sort of testing the fence in different places. So we have to check it pretty regularly. So that's a little bit of a risk benefit. Like I would like to have more wind protection, but not at the cost of like deer getting in here. One thing that I have seen at Sandy Cruz's place, she has a place just north of here that's also really exposed, is she set up a bunch of pallets vertically just in front of like individual trees, especially when they're smaller, to like let them get established. So we've been collecting pallets. They're in the resource area, right? I don't always know exactly how I'm going to use a pallet, but it's going to be useful sometimes. So that's definitely something I would consider in some places. I mean, we could even try building like literally a pallet fence down the west side of just the production field itself, and that might help some as well. There are diagrams and things I've seen, resources online to say, you know, if you have a windbreak that is 5 feet tall, how far back from that does that actually protect you from wind? And I can't remember what it is, but it's not, you know, it's not infinite, obviously. So that's another thing I would probably look into. And that might, if I looked that up and decided to do that, that might tell me where I wanted to plant that perennial row of apples partway down the field.
Great, thanks. That's it for questions right now.
Great, okay, then I'll talk about the dome. Okay, so we're in the dome. Like I said, we put it up last August. If you look around, we haven't put the beds in yet, and we're making the beds out of blocks. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think it'll be easier for us to make sort of curves, and the biggest that they'll be wide enough for our people to sit on them as an edge, so they'll sort of help make this space function both as a production space and as an educational space. The layout here that we have of the beds is there's a perimeter bed that's going to go all the way around the perimeter of the dome. I'll talk about that one more in a second. And then we have what I call the smile bed, which is here. It's sort of made up of all of these pallets. And then we have, we tried to leave a space in the center that was fairly open from at least permanent beds for right now so that we can use it as a gathering space. And then there's what I call the M bed that has 2 legs and it sort of goes around the central tank. So you can see that like, even though we haven't built the beds yet here, it's been a really crucial space for us to get so many plants started. Like I said, this dome has been mostly staying above, probably like even on the coldest night, it didn't freeze. It probably got down to 35. And so otherwise it's mostly been staying about 40 at night. And so this has been a great place for us to start a lot of plants that are maybe a little bit more tolerant of cool temperatures, but aren't ready to go outside or even ready to just be open in the high tunnel yet. I want to talk a little bit about a couple different systems in the dome. So the big system really is like, I would say, the temperature moderation system. It's not quite heating, it's not quite cooling, it does both. So that's mostly focused on the tank. The tank is 13 feet wide, 13 feet in diameter, and so it holds a ton of water, and that water just warms up slowly and cools down slowly. So at night, it's a lot warmer than the rest of the air, and it helps to keep things from freezing. And during the day, it's a lot cooler, and it's gathering the temperature, the heat from the sun during the day and warming up, and it's just moderating that whole temperature. As we build more beds in here, and those blocks, those will also serve as a big heat sink to help keep that temperature much more even than in the high tunnel. Right now in the high tunnel, we're routinely seeing swings from like 20 degrees at night or 25 degrees at night up until the upper 90s. That's a really stressful for plants. I mean, it's stressful for people too, but it's like, so trying to keep it a little bit more moderated is really part of why things grow so well in the dome. The other thing that is gonna work to like help keep temperatures fairly moderated here are these 5 fans. So you can see one that's sort of behind me. These aren't plugged in yet because we have the electric line over here, but haven't hooked up to electricity yet. But they still, the vents still open and close on their own, and they're on a thermostat setting. So I can make it open when it's warmer or cooler, and then when we get breezes, they can come through here. At the very top of the dome, we have 2, I think they're actually technically like attic ventilator fans, and they are run on solar. So anytime that it's sunny, they will run. They're also on a thermostat. And so that really helps to like get a lot of the heat out of here. When we were building the dome, we built it with, we had a bunch of scaffolding in here. And so when we were up in the very top in August, it was so hot up there before we put in those ventilation fans. So they make a big difference. The other thing that you can see up there that we'll in general remove in the winter, but we've left it in this winter because we didn't have things growing in here yet, is a shade cloth. And so that also helps to keep it a little bit cooler in the summer. I said I was going to talk about the perimeter bed, and I will. So Leah, you're going to follow me. So back over here, one thing that's going to run through the perimeter bed is this undersoil duct system. And so we have the ducting over there. So it's like it's a corrugated plastic tubing. It will be laid down right on top of the current floor when we build up the beds. And the beds are they're gonna be 2 feet tall. They're gonna go to the edge of this flashing, and then they'll be 2 feet tall here as well. So that tubing will be almost 2 feet deep in the soil. And then these 2 are fans that are also solar powered. And so they will basically pull that air. The intake will be right next to the tank. They'll pull the air through the bottom of that bed and then bring it out right here. And what that does is that the bottom of that bed also stays a much more constant temperature throughout the day. And so at night, that bed is warmer than the air. And so when they pull the air through there, it'll be a little bit warmer air. And during the day, that deep in the bed, the soil is a lot cooler than the air, and it'll cool the air. It's something that is called sometimes a climate battery, although a climate battery is usually dug into the ground. Because of how wet we are here, they recommended that we not do an actual climate battery into the ground. So this will still give us some of the benefits, just not as strong. Maybe I'll stop there and see if you guys have questions about like the temperature moderation.
Excuse me, yeah, there was just one question that came in just now. How are the vent fans and ceiling fans set in the hard plastic walls? Are they in frames? Are they in frames? That's the question.
Yes, they are in frames. That's one I know less about because I was not the one to put them in, but they are in these wooden frames, and they have on the outside, we can take a peek at this either. They all have a little, I would call it like a shed dormer, like it has a little cap over it so that it's not exposed directly to the outside from the top and it won't rain in.
Thanks.
And when we get them in the middle of the winter, if I have crops in here, which I will next year, I am gonna cover this whole thing with a piece of insulation so that it's not getting as cold.
I don't see any additional questions right this minute, so we can go ahead and go back, and it's about 4:15 right now, just for timing.
Cool. Okay. Well, I wanted to take a peek at the tank, and maybe also take a peek a little bit at some of the plants that we have in here. So first thing, as we were walking, I wanted to say also about the design and layout of the beds that we have here is that you'll see we have relatively wide pathways. That has two purposes. The first is so that this is like ADA compliant, and so that we can welcome all students from the school district in here. But conveniently, what works for a wheelchair also works really well for a wheelbarrow, and like wanting to get in and out and do different things is going to be a lot easier with pathways that are wide enough for us to access them. A couple things that we're putting in here also. So behind me, you can see there's a red-handled frost-free hydrant. So that's how we're getting water in here. We're also going to be putting in a winter wash station in here so that we can wash in here in the winter when it's really cold outside and we don't have to worry about things freezing. I'm sorry, I took you the way that you're going to have to watch out for the hose. So the water tank, like I said, its main purpose in a lot of ways is to be a big heat sink and help moderate the temperature. But the thing that has also been really useful about it is that we have all of these styrofoam trays, and we've been able to start a lot of our cool crops in here. So like I said, it doesn't stay quite as warm, but it is a lot warmer than outside, and it's a lot warmer even than just the ambient temperature in the open part of the hoop house. So we put things in here right now. We have scallions and lettuce, I believe. No, scallions and dill. But you can see we've had a lot more trays in there. And once they germinate, once I see, I would say 75% germination, I pull them out and I put them on the ground in the areas where the beds are going to be. This is also a good way for me to test out, like, does this bed layout feel good? Because I'm not going to walk on them. And part of the reason we do that is that for the ones where I left them in there a lot longer, they started forming a little bit of algae on the top because they weren't really ever drying out. So this helps, it's like another step in that process of hardening them off. So let's take a peek at them because they're kind of cool on the bottom. These are the plant starts that they do in here are pyramidal in shape. And you can see they have a whole lot of roots coming out the bottom of them. And so, so far they've looked like really great transplants. We've planted in the high tunnel, the first set of lettuce that we did with that. And I've been really happy with them. So this is sort of what the transplant looks like. You can see what I like about it is that you are getting roots all the way down to the bottom of the transplant. And so these are probably ready to go in anytime. I probably want to pull them back out of here. And so I'll take them over to the high tunnel for a couple days first and let them get a little more accustomed to being a little colder at night and a little hotter during the day. And then we'll move them out onto those pallets to harden them off further, and then they'll go out into the field. Do people have any more questions, maybe first about the dome or our transplant systems, or then about anything?
Here's a question that just came in. Are there plans to set up an aquaponics system with the tank?
Great question. Yes, there are. and I need to get us some kind of pump and like waterfall system to aerate the water to have fish. I worked on a farm that had this kind of dome before, and we just did goldfish in it, but there's like a lot of different fish options that we'll be looking into. Along with like different kinds of aquatic plants. So the last place I worked that had a dome, we grew a few cranberries in the tank. Not really enough for production, but just because I think it's really cool to see what kind of things, what cranberries look like when they grow, since we don't usually grow them here. That reminds me, there's like another thing I wanted to say, sort of like when we're thinking about what things we're growing in the dome, like one of the big things that we really want to do with this is have more year-round production and have more variety longer into the school year. You know, we have about 100 frost-free days here, and they mostly don't overlap with the school district calendar. And so that's been one of the big challenges with Farm to School, and why we've put so much effort and focus on trying to build out more season extension here, is to try and have more produce available during the school year. And so there's a lot of things that we're going to grow in here, like cherry tomatoes and cucumbers that we're already growing, but we can have them longer into the fall if we grow them in here. There's some things that have been requested by the school district, like sweet potatoes, which it's not that we're going to be able to supply all the sweet potatoes that the school would need for a year, but we can supply some of them. And again, we can sort of use it as an educational space to say, this is how sweet potatoes grow. And then we'll have some things that are going to be much more just for demonstration, like fig trees, that there's no way we could supply, you know, a school district of 1,300 kids with a really significant number of figs. But, you know, if we get to see, like, I didn't see how a fig tree grew until I was in my 30s. And so if we can let kids and the community see, like, this is what this looks like, and this is how a fig is pollinated, because it's pollinated by a tiny wasp. It's totally different from how other things are pollinated. Like, we're really excited to see, like, you know, like with the aquaponics, like that's also going to be more of an educational thing. Like, could we grow some fish that we could like fry up and eat? Probably, yeah. And, you know, like where are the places where we can really use that and stack those functions again and have it be like educational and have it be really a rich place for us to use for the schools and the community.
Thanks, Monica. There's a question about the styrofoam trays, and did we buy them or did we make them, or?
So the styrofoam trays, actually the high tunnel used to have a tank in it, and it was used for hydroponics, and then that was taken out and we just built raised beds in there instead. And so the styrofoam trays, when I got to this farm a year ago, I inherited, and I originally thought about getting rid of them, and then I decided that they were going to be really useful as like insulation around to block places where there might be little gaps or like cold spots in the high tunnel. But so it's kind of dumb luck that I still had them. And the original idea of starting things in the tank here came because I was going away right after I wanted to start the first seedlings, and I didn't want to necessarily start asking everybody else to come water like 3 trays. And I was like, well, this is kind of a great chance. I can just try. I have a little soil, I have 3 trays worth, and I tried them in there and it worked great. So I don't actually know where we got them, but I would guess that like a hydroponic supply store would have them.
Yeah, that high tunnel design originally, we worked with Agriburbia. If anybody knows Clint Redmond down in, I think he's in Golden. And that water tank that Monica mentioned was a part of that design, and the styrofoam trays kind of just, as far as I know, came with that, but I don't know the specific supply store that might have come from. We have another freeze here on the screen, so we'll give it a minute and see if it shifts. And then just, are there any other questions right now?
I don't know if I have anything else to say. If we want, we could go back outside and we can look at what I'm going to call the moat. which is, so since we raised up the soil level to build the dome, there is a lower part right outside here, and that's where the culvert that comes under that new driveway sort of goes through. And so that's also quite a wet space. And the things I've been thinking about for there have been either rhubarb, which would do better because it's on the north side, so it might be a little cooler and a little shadier in the summer, and potentially trying some mushrooms. And one of the mushrooms I'm really excited to try out here is called portobello almond. And it's supposed to taste a little bit like almonds, and it grows on straight garden compost. And it's a summer fruiting mushroom, which makes me think that there's some chance that we could like grow it in a drier area. So I think one of the thoughts is if we grow it in an area that's on the north side, it's not getting a lot of direct sunlight, then maybe we can keep it moist enough in a really moist area to grow mushrooms. I did discover some kind of big portobello type mushroom I didn't eat because I don't know it that well. Last year in the middle of the field, I was trying to pick up rocks to weight down some tarps, and I went down and picked up this perfect, nice round rock, and I put my thumb right through it, and it was a mushroom. So this does seem to be a pretty good mushroom farm for Colorado. So we'll go take a quick look at the moat, and let me know if there's any other questions.
Monica, can you hear us right now?
I can.
Oh, cool. Okay, so there was a question about cold frames, and do we use them? Do we currently have any cold frames that we're using at the farm?
We don't. It's something that I've thought about doing, sort of a modified cold frame off the side of the high tunnel, of just taking at the hip board, which is sort of, I think it's misnamed, it's not anybody's hip. It's sort of about this height, where the hoops sort of bend. There is a place where you can wiggle wire in plastic, and I've thought about putting a little layer out sort of diagonally in front of that and doing a little cold frame off the side of the greenhouse, or the hoop house, but I haven't done that yet.
Mm-hmm. Cool. That was it. I think we have about 5 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. If you're wondering, it's 72 degrees right now in the dome. It's not 72 degrees out here. So this is just the area I was talking about with it being a little lower and kind of a swale. It's right at the outlet of that culvert. So I think it would be a good place for mushrooms or rhubarb. And I'll just sort of, actually, we'll go pan over here a little bit. You know, the whole community and school farm is about 4 acres. And there's quite a bit of it that we haven't been using. And that's partly because it's even lower and even wetter, and it just has a really high water table. And so it's, for me, it also feels really nice to have there be an area that's still left a little bit more wild. We have western bluebirds here, and it's nice to have, you know, although we need to like make sure that we keep out the deer out, it's nice to have some other kinds of wildlife out here as well. Well, I am so glad to share some about the community and school farm with you all. And please let me know if you have other questions as we go through. My email is Monica, MONICA, at guidestonecolorado.org. And I'm really excited to talk with people about making sure that everybody feels comfortable doing what they want to do to start a garden, maybe a raised bed, maybe a home scale compost. Or apply some of the things that are working here or some of the things that are not working here to their own farm as well. So thanks so much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing some of you guys at AgriSummit, other AgriSummit events tomorrow.
Monica, can you hear us right now? Okay. Well, I know that there's a couple of questions in here that didn't get answered about bindweed, and So how about this? I'll respond. We'll get back to you specifically about that one, and want just to thank you again for being a part of this farm tour today. And also, so Monica, and who you didn't see behind the camera is Leah Capizio. She's Guidestone's community outreach specialist. So just thanks again for joining us, and hopefully we'll have a chance, maybe we'll see you tomorrow. And one of the ideas that came up is that maybe we do a quarterly tour across the whole season, so you can come back and see what it looks like as it starts to grow and when we're ready for harvest. So look towards that, because we may have more to share as the season goes along. But thanks again, and hopefully we'll see you tomorrow.
Thank you. He said that.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Philip and Aretta and Kayla.
She's not here. She's
Okay.
working. But there's Leona.
Oh, hi, Leona. Thank you.
Pretty awesome. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for joining us. Nice to see you all.
We'll see.
I am.
Bye, guys.